you do a re-ranking, which to me, in and of itself, and for those listening, please hit the like button. We appreciate it. For those listening to know where we come from, sure, we love covering Tennessee football, but we also are able to look at it with some perspective and objectively. And I mean, there are things happening in these recruiting rankings that are a bit of a head scratcher. Let's just be real frank. Okay. So, with these recruiting rankings, what in the world could you have done since the end of your senior season to improve your ranking? Nico Iamaleava has jumped up to number one over Arch Manning in the On3 rankings, and they're shifting around, and I can still remember with a prominent recruiting analysts having this discussion way back in 2000 when they would change their rankings right before signing day. And the question was, what in the world have they done? Well, I mean, Nico was in practice at the Orange Bowl. Other guys have been in practice. So I guess he out practiced them. I don't know, Caleb, what you could possibly do in that time frame to improve your ranking that it's been set over the past 4 years. So I'm not in any way knocking Tennessee. I'm not knocking the recruiting services, but it is what it is. Okay, so you have a situation where one of the biggest sites on the On3 network is VolQuest and Brent Hubbs, and I think Brent does a phenomenal job at what he does, and I think that the recruiting rankings are kind of probably out of his hands, but they are a part of it. And I think it's worth stating that when you generate more interest for a big one of the biggest sites on your network, that's probably good business, right? Does it make great sense in terms of actually ranking a player? No, not really. I mean, what I've been told by scouts and coaches is that Nico is the perfect fit for Josh Heupel's system. I've been told that Arch Manning is a guy that's probably a little bit more versatile, could run more of a pro style of system than Nico could. And I believe that based off watching their tape. After I was told that, I went back and watched it, and I believe that's the case. That's not a knock on either of the dudes. But when you go actually look at the rankings, I thought it was very odd that Tennessee is posting now recruiting rankings on their Twitter account. Used to be you couldn't make even a public comment about that, Caleb, and now you can send out tweets to thousands and thousands of people. I thought that was a strange tweet. Just what did you think about that, and maybe a little bit of crowing from Tennessee's perspective?
Yeah, and I agree. And I also think Tennessee needs to keep in some perspective right now. And Jaru wrote about this, and I want to give him a major shout out. It's on offthehooksports.com right now, breaking down the rankings, as you said. And Tennessee has 3 top 50 players according to the new updated On3 rankings. All right, not bad. Alabama's got 8. Georgia's got 4. They are
I believe
in
Alabama
the
had 3 in the top 10, right?
Yeah, Alabama's got 3 in the top 10. Georgia's in the running for a 5th. And the thing with Tennessee is I've been on this train since the Lane Kiffin days. And I know Lane Kiffin worked his tail off in recruiting. If there's one thing Lane Kiffin did hard, he recruited hard. He always talked about the importance of recruiting when he was at Tennessee.
He also recruited hardened criminals, but anyway.
Exactly. That's the thing. Tennessee, he did. That 2009 class is one of the worst classes of all time. It was one of the biggest bust of classes of all time. And I've said this for a while.
Did you know Jansen Jackson killed one of his cellmates?
I knew. Oh, he killed one of his cellmates? I knew he
found that out yesterday and threatened some media members with physical harm. But I'm not going to get into that. You go ahead, Caleb.
I mean, there's also one that just decided to rob a gas station, 3 of them, for no reason whatsoever. But
that was Jansen, and suddenly the third one escapes my memory. Go ahead.
But yeah, the thing about recruiting, and Tennessee is going to have to understand this, and we talked about this yesterday about easiest jobs in America. You can't just hire nowadays with Tennessee football until they find a way to get ahead of the curve. You can't just hire a recruiter at Tennessee the way you can at LSU, Georgia, or Alabama, because Tennessee is not as positioned to win just on recruiting. You're going to have to be less selective to get your players. As Lane Kiffin showed, he was not selective at all when he was just going for the best players he could get, period. And Tennessee's selling point with Heupel, we talked about this during the season, is that Josh Heupel's so ahead of the curve offensively. Tennessee has a creative offensive mind that makes them their selling point. Very good coaching, very good X's and O's. It's weird. It's a weird flex, quite honestly, to sell three top 50 recruits. Particularly, again, going back to the Lane Kiffin year, the last time I remember Tennessee selling how great they did on the recruiting trail, most of the time Tennessee's done that the last 20 years, those classes didn't pan out. I mean, Butch Jones had back-to-back top 5 classes. Those weren't top 5 classes. Lane Kiffin sold his top 10 class in 2009. That wasn't a top 10 class. Fulmer's last great class, 2007, was a top 5 class. If not for Eric Berry, that's one of the worst classes ever if you look at everybody else in that class. I think, wasn't Gerald Jones the second best performer in that class?
I think so. Yeah.
So, it's I'm not, I pay a lot of attention to recruiting rankings. I'm not one who dismisses them and says they don't matter. No, they matter. But when you look at Tennessee's situation and when you look at it relative to the level they're trying to get to, selling the recruiting rankings isn't going to be your win. And your win might be, if you want to point out Nico being the number 1 overall prospect, that's fine. Throwing out 3 top 50 prospects makes little sense relative to what you're competing with.
Here is the thing that I think Tennessee. I'm not going to say A plus. A plus in Josh Heupel's third year would be a top 5 class, top 3 class. Okay, so I'm not going to say A plus, but if you ask me to grade where he is recruiting wise, as compared to where I thought he would be when he was hired, that was the big question mark. I truly believe it's an A right now. I believe to be a top 10-ish class is an A. It's not an A plus, but you've got room to grow there. You got things that you can continue to do. You haven't even benefited off the 2022 season yet. That takes a year or 2 or 3. I mean, there are a lot of guys that'll say, I saw this team back in 3 years ago playing for a championship, and that's why I signed with them 3 years later. Please hit that like button so we can bring up more people. We greatly appreciate that. So I've got complete respect. As a matter of fact, I'm somewhat surprised, if not astounded, about how well Josh Heupel has recruited. But the idea that you're there and you've planted the flag on the top of Mount Everest is just not the case right now. It's the equivalent of when Tennessee was number 1 in October after beating Alabama, saying you won the national championship. No, you didn't. You are somewhere along the path, but you have not distinguished yourself as one of the elite recruiting programs in the nation yet. I think there's a good chance that'll happen. I've said before that Tennessee with NIL, their fan base, their facilities, and all that, I think Caleb and I could get a top 25 class, and I'm not even joking. I think Caleb and I, with a good budget, could get a top 25 class. So that's kind of, to me, the bottom. Yeah, I remember Philip Fulmer one time slipped in the mid 30s, and I was like, uh-oh, that's not a good sign. So, and it wasn't. And so I think right now I give it an A as overall recruiting in 2 years, roughly 2 years since he was hired. Oh, or 3 years now, right? What?
2 years.
2
2
years.
years.
2 years. So heading into the third cycle, I guess is what I was thinking. I get my years mixed up from years of covering recruiting. You'll hear me start calling this 2024 here in a couple months. So I really believe that he is on the right path, and they will be an elite recruiting program. I just don't think it's quite yet, and I think a lot of it depends on what happens with Nico. And I believe that especially seeing what's going on at Florida, and you've got a quarterback that's backing out because the money wasn't actually there, and he's trying to get away. I don't think any of that type of shenanigans are going to happen at Tennessee. And I believe quite firmly, after not taking a quarterback in the transfer portal, Caleb, that Josh Heupel's saying it's Milton or Nico. And I think it's going to be a real competition in the spring. So if Nico comes out and ends up the starter, has a great year, then it just helps you in recruiting more. But no, to say that you have 3 in the top 50 and to kind of put yourself out there as it's done, we're good, that's putting the cart ahead of the horse.
Far ahead of the horse. I mean, because again, Tennessee across most services is on the cusp of a top 10 class. I mean, it's right there on the borderline. And so, as you know, top 10 class is middle of the pack in the SEC. And you're right, we can, you and I could fall out of bed and get a top 25 class at Tennessee. But Tennessee's in a conference where we talked about it yesterday, there's at least 2 programs, I think 3, where you can fall out of bed and get a top 10 class. I think Georgia and LSU, anybody can get a top 10 class at those 2 schools, maybe even a top 5 class at LSU without even trying. And Alabama, I think you can get a top 10 class without trying. So that's what Tennessee's up against.